Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be giving my account of the questions from the leaders of the two largest opposition parties in Westminster, Labour and the SNP, to Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. That's why it's called Prime Minister's Questions. Important to mention that, because it seems that this is news to the Prime Minister himself. And it was a session where, if you didn't know better, you'd think the Prime Minister had had a nervous breakdown or something, because a part of his brain just broke partway through proceedings, it seems. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, before I watched it, because I can't watch it live at the moment, so I saw something on Twitter, someone saying, oh, I'm going to be really interested to see your account of PMQs. And I thought, what happened? What happened? And I saw a little clip before I watched the thing itself, the full thing itself, of the speaker shouting down Boris Johnson, because he again, his usual trick of keeps trying to not answer the questions himself, but then trying to ask questions of Starmer. But that it led to a whole exchange that I just wasn't prepared for. But we'll kick it off. First of all, Starmer's first question. And if I say the first question, it was actually a theme. He designed this around his 6 questions on a central theme, which was the ministerial code. And he quoted Boris Johnson, because in the ministerial code there's a foreword by the Prime Minister. So Boris Johnson wrote his foreword to the Prime Ministerial Code, and Starmer quoted a couple of lines in it saying there must be no bullying, no harassment, no leaking, no misuse of taxpayer money, no actual or perceived conflicts of interest. Starmer said that's 5 promises in 2 sentences. How many of those promises does the Prime Minister think his ministers have kept? Very interesting. Johnson didn't answer the question. Now, I know he makes a habit of not answering the question, but what a question not to answer. It's as simple as this. You've made certain promises here. How many have you kept, Boris? Actually, I mean, it's how many has his government kept in this particular case. And he went on to talk about infrastructure, what they're going to do for infrastructure, which they never will, by the way. But that's his bolt hole. When he doesn't want to answer a question, I'm going to promise lots of great things in the future. Oh, it's going to be fantastic. You just wait and see. It's like Trump's wall. Ain't happening, mate. It's never happening. And if you're just thinking, just give him a chance, give Boris a chance. He had a chance. He was Mayor of London. Look at how many of his infrastructure projects succeeded there. They didn't. They're none of them. But and you could tell where this was going. Obviously, Starmer was going to set all of the questions around this, and indeed he did. So the second question, he said, first of all, he noted that there was no answer to that. That Boris Johnson had no answer to it. So he says, right, well, let's go through them then. He said, let's start with bullying and harassment. And then he brought up quotes of Patel's report. So I've already done a video on this one. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, in a report has been found to have bullied and harassed staff consistently over a long period of time. To the point where one member of staff was driven to suicide. Didn't, thankfully, go through with it. But to the point. And so Starmer said, what message does the Prime Minister think it sends that the independent advisor on standards has resigned, but the Home Secretary is still in post? So it's Johnson basically said it's fine because she apologised. Yeah, she said she was sorry. I mean, what more do you want? I mean, Dominic Cummings didn't even say he was sorry. I mean, Patel's done better than that, hasn't she? Give her a break. That was basically his response. And then Johnson says that he makes no apology for sticking by his bullying Home Secretary. All right. And Starmer stood up. He said, look, any other Prime Minister would have fired the Home Secretary and any other Home Secretary would have resigned. Now, I will have to point out, just like last week, there were obvious murmurs of approval in the chamber, very audible, and there were none to be discerned against. Now, this is important. Boris Johnson relies upon his MPs for vocal support. When the social distancing had to be brought into the House of Commons debating chamber, it was a disaster for the Conservatives because they wanted them there. They knew that Boris Johnson, without his crowd, was completely lost, completely at sea. He needs the baying crowd. When he stands up, rubbish pours out of his mouth. They all know that. Conservative MPs know that. They know that he needs the cheering to make him bullish, and for any casual observers to think that he's made a good point when he spouts his crap. Because a load of people have cheered, he must have said a clever thing. You're not getting that in the debating chamber. And obviously it very much suits Keir Starmer, who's used to that sort of courtroom drama. He's a former top prosecutor. So this is why it's really, really important, because the noise is all for Starmer. And you haven't got any sort of wall of sound back from the Conservative MPs. Which basically means they can't bring themselves to do it. You know, it's like they're not going to stick their neck out and force Boris Johnson to get rid of Priti Patel, or force him to, you know, get his other ministers to stick to the ministerial code. They know it's wrong, but they won't stick their necks out to say it's wrong or to demand that Johnson behaves himself. But at the same time, they're not going to stick their neck out for him either. But anyway, Starmer then said, OK, on to the next promise, no leaking. And he said, look, we saw repeated leaks on the local restrictions this summer. I mean, that's the thing that actually annoyed a lot of Conservative MPs. The fact that government policies were constantly being announced in the papers. Pissed them off no end. And then Starmer said, and we saw the plans for the lockdown leaked all over the national press, resulting in a truly chaotic press conference. And we've seen more leaking in the last 24 hours. Now, what he may be referring to there, he didn't say. It may be the leaked government documents on their panic, it's the best way of describing it, over the combination of Brexit and other factors, including COVID, flooding and all sorts of things, that are going to create a perfect storm of nightmares in 2021. If it is that he's talking about, that's probably why he didn't mention it, because at the moment in PMQs, Brexit must not be mentioned because that is the hill that Boris Johnson wants to fight on. But I will be talking more about that one tomorrow, I think. Maybe later today, but it could be tomorrow. Then Starmer noted the leak inquiry. So Boris Johnson seemed to be genuinely irked about that particular leak. We know who leaked it. It's widely reported to be Michael Gove. It makes sense that it be Michael Gove. But he ordered a leak inquiry, and so Starmer said, look, is the Prime Minister any closer to identifying who was leaking this vital information? To which Johnson said, well, you know, I don't know. When I know, I'll tell you. And it's like, well, Starmer didn't ask that, did he? He didn't ask if you knew. He said, are you any closer? In other words, have you got any useful leads, or we're just going nowhere with this? But then Johnson tried to suggest that Starmer was focusing on trivia and that the Labour leader should be supporting him. It's classic Donald Trump again, isn't it? It's like, you should be saying how great I am. Why are you focusing on all this piddling little stuff? Just say how great I am and the whole world will be better. And then Boris Johnson said something else that was truly curious. And again, it shows why he should never ad lib. I mean, although I attack him for just coming out with stuff that he would say to any question, because it doesn't answer the question, it's just his stock lines that he uses every week. From his advisor's point of view, they have to do that with him because he can't think on his feet. And, I mean, look what happened when he tried to think on his feet last week. He ended up saying devolution was a disaster. That didn't go well for him. He basically said that he doesn't take the ministerial code seriously. And I'm not reading stuff between the lines there. I kid you not. He said, in reference to the ministerial code, I'd take it more seriously if the leader of the opposition would explain why Jeremy Corbyn, whom he called the member for Islington North, because you call them by their constituency, if the leader of the opposition would explain why Jeremy Corbyn is still a member of the Labour Party. Now, clumsy attempt to poke at the Corbyn wounds inside Labour aside, what he actually said was, he's not taking the ministerial code seriously. The fact that I am not taking the ministerial code seriously is your fault for not taking Jeremy Corbyn seriously. That's what he said. So he's basically admitted to not taking the code seriously. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Unfortunately, Starmer didn't point this out. I wish he had. And then he asked Starmer if he thought that Corbyn should still be a member of the Labour Party. This is when the Speaker interjected. This is when it all kicked off. I couldn't believe it. So the Speaker interjected, reminding Boris Johnson, not for the first time, that it's Prime Minister's questions. Then the Speaker tried to sit down. Keir Starmer tried to stand up. And then Johnson tried to argue. He said, well, these are reasonable questions, and the Speaker shut him down again. He said, I'll be the judge of that, Prime Minister. And then I think he threatened to cut the PM's audio off, because that got a bit of a cheer as well. He said, it's good that we've got sound. It'd be a shame if we lost it. I thought the Speaker has missed his calling. Sir Lindsay Hoyle should have been a mob. He should have been a gangster in the mob. You know, the sort that goes into shops and go, oh, this is a nice little business you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it, wouldn't it? I couldn't believe it. Huge laugh. And even because it panned out at this point, I could see Conservative MPs laughing at that one. Now, at this point, like I said, were I Keir Starmer, because Johnson has done this before, the thing is, I think Keir Starmer, because he's a bit more of an intellectual, I think if he feels he's made a particular comeback, he doesn't want to use it again for, I don't know for what reason. He should. Boris Johnson has yet again tried to ask Starmer questions. Starmer's stock response, there's nothing wrong with stock responses to certain things, by the way. His stock response should have been, look, if the Prime Minister wants to ask me questions, I am more than happy to take over the role if he's bored or if he's finding it hard to make ends meet on a salary 5 times the national average. That would have got a cheer as well. He should just do it every time, because he has said it in the past, but he's only said it once, I think. I would say it every single time, without fail, because repetition is bloody effective on the electorate. Keep saying it, and I'll guarantee, first of all, 1, Johnson will eventually shut up. But 2, if he doesn't shut up, great. I'll keep using it. I'll keep using the fact that you don't want to be Prime Minister, you don't want to answer questions, you don't really enjoy the job. That's fine. Tell your MPs to support me. The rest of the country supports me anyway. Polling says that the majority of the country would be in favour of me being Prime Minister anyway. I'm open to that. I'm quite happy. And then I'll field your questions as Leader of the Opposition every single week. No problem at all. And what's more, I'll answer them. But he didn't. Instead, what he said, which was still effective, he said, the difference is that I am dealing with the issues in my party, whereas the Prime Minister is hiding away from the issues in his. And then ensued an amount of noise, which may not have all been approving, I accept, but an amount of noise that I have not heard in the chamber since social distancing was introduced. It was, honestly, if you just listened to it, you might have thought that this was a PMQs or a debate from before COVID. It was that loud, and there's actually not that many of them in the chamber. Again, like I said, that may not have all been approving ones. But it was very noisy. At which point, it obviously got Johnson rattled, because he tried to shout Starmer down. He was out of his seat. He was stood up, and he was calling out, taunting. He was like, "Ooh, go. Honestly, I am not kidding. That's what he was doing. He was like a drunk at a football match, taunting the fan on the opposite stand. It was a remarkable sight. It's the British Prime Minister, everyone. Behaving like a yob. I mean, I know he is a yob, but come on, some decorum, please. It's the House of Commons. But yeah, then on to the main matter at hand. So then Starmer noted that Johnson has no idea who's leaking. So that's another promise broken then. Then he says, right, we'll move on to the misuse of taxpayer money. He brought up the contracts again, the contracts that go nowhere, the vast sums of money wasted on contracts for companies that you wouldn't really think can deliver on the PPE contracts they're given. And do you know what? You'd be right, because they didn't. He noted that the Cabinet Office response to a question wasn't that 50 million items of unusable equipment that were delivered, that the government had paid for, but it was actually 180 million pieces. And then he noted the National Audit Office have just released a report that shows £214 million of money spent on face masks for the NHS that cannot be used. Just wasted. He said, so will the Prime Minister come clean? How many hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been wasted on equipment that can't be used? I think he should have added in there equipment that was never delivered as well, because that's still waste. I mean, I suppose there's a chance that we wouldn't pay if we didn't have it delivered, but I'm not sure that's the case. But needless to say, the Prime Minister didn't answer that question either. In fact, he tried to answer his own question and fiddled the response to even his own question. Then he went on another whine about Labour again. It's like, they won't support me. They won't. What's wrong with them? Didn't they understand? They should just support me and the world will be lovely. Usual thing. Then Starmer stood up for his fifth, and in response to the non-answer, Starmer said, look, it's pretty obvious that the Prime Minister either doesn't know how much taxpayer money has been wasted or he doesn't care. So far, that's bullying, harassment, leaking and misuse of taxpayers' money, he said. He was in full prosecutor mode here. It's not looking good so far, he said. And the next one, he said, is no actual or perceived conflicts of interest. And then turned to his side. Technically, he's turning towards the speaker, but it also has the effect of turning to his side. Where do I start on this one? Big laugh in the chamber again. Then he noted last week we learned that suppliers with political connections were 10 times more likely to receive government contracts. And then he talked about a report in the Sunday Times from the weekend that Matt Hancock had appointed one of his closest friends to a key advisory role. This friend had shares in a company who specialises in lobbying the government. And wonder of wonders, some of the clients of that company have secured tens of millions of pounds of government contracts. Then Starmer asked, was the Prime Minister aware of this apparent conflict of interest? To which again, Johnson said, again, remarkable, he said, well, you know, if there's evidence of conflicts of interest, that'll be evident from the details of the contracts. Now, there's a few things spring to mind here. First of all, you're not supposed to let them go through and wait for people in the public to spot these conflicts of interest. You're supposed to do your due process. You're supposed to make sure there are no conflicts of interest. Your ministers are supposed to do that. That's the whole point of this bloody question. The ministerial code, which you wrote, or the forward you wrote, says no conflicts of interest, even perceived conflicts of interest. Because in theory, appointing someone who maybe just so happens to benefit financially from a government contract, who is advising on who you should give that contract to, could just be a perceived conflict of interest. It may well be that that advisor is advising the best company and they just happen to be such a believer in that company. They have shares in it. That's possible. Even that's not allowed. Second thing, the government are unlawfully concealing the details of these government contracts, sitting on them for months, when they're supposed to be published by law within 30 days, for which they're being taken to court, by the way. The initial court action is now going to go through to full hearings. There's going to be full hearings on quite a few things next year. That's been confirmed. And then the third thing is to say to his quick. So he was saying, well, there'll be conflicts of interest will become evident with the details of the contracts. Yeah, they have. Some of these contracts have now been published and people have identified conflicts of interest. The leader of the opposition has just mentioned one of them. Would you like to respond to that? No? Oh no, you'd just like to bash Labour and their attitude towards the private sector. I see. Okay, fair enough. At which point then Starmer, for his sixth, remember his sixth he gets no comeback from, so he just needs to make it stick, said, nobody's knocking the private sector, the government's knocking the taxpayer. And then he said, so I think it's a clean sweep. Bullying, harassment, leaking, wasting public money and obvious conflicts of interest. He said it's the same old story, one rule for the British public, another rule for the Prime Minister and his friends. He said, look at the difference in attitude between spraying public money at contracts awarded to his mates and the pay rises for public sector workers keeping the country going. He said, if you've got a hotline to the government, you're given a blank cheque. But if you're on the front line, you're picking up the bill. He said, will the Prime Minister finally get his priorities right and stop wasting taxpayers' money and give police officers, firefighters, care workers and other key workers the pay rise they so obviously deserve? Now, obviously, as I say, last question, so Johnson's free to grandstand again. But that's fine because it wasn't really a question. It was a statement on the disdain that this government have for ordinary workers and the people, that our society simply cannot function without. And grandstand it is, same old crap, saying the government have actually given above inflation pay rises, stuff like that. The thing is, though, when you look at public sector pay now, then in real terms, it's lower than it was when Labour were last in power. So they haven't even caught up. All of their pay for just because they every now and then give out a little pay rise. It's like if you freeze someone's pay for 5 years and then you give them above inflationary pay rise for 1 year and then it's back to another 5 years of pay rise, that's still a net loss, isn't it? But of course, no one could cut back, so we could come out with that crap. And again, it's odd for him to talk about how the Tories have been giving out these pay rises in the same week that the Chancellor's announced pay freezes for those workers. But there it is. Then on to Ian Blackford's questions for the SNP. Now, they were a little bit flat. He did make a good point, but they were a little bit flat. It was the foreign aid budget, which is important. So what's happened is there's a suggestion. At the moment, we pay 0.7% of our GDP to the foreign aid budget, and it's going to be cut to 0.5%, is what is believed. So Blackford quoted a senior government minister saying that the 0.7% commitment, which is potentially now abolished, was the ambition of the government. Does the Prime Minister agree with the statement from that senior government minister? To which Johnson danced around it, didn't contradict it. And he said, well, look, we're the second biggest contributor in the G7 and will remain so. Now, here's the thing. I'm afraid, I'm sorry, going to have to sort of back Johnson up here. Much as it pains me, you have to be fair. Now, I'm not in favour, if this decision genuinely has been made, and it hasn't been officially announced, but it's believed to be close. So if they are going to cut the budget from 0.7% to 0.5%, in what is, let's face facts, clearly a cheap shot to satisfy the xenophobes on the right. Oh, yeah, bloody foreigners, that's it, you stick it to them, Johnson. But here's the thing. He made the point that we're the second largest contributor in the G7. It is true that there are a lot of countries in the G7 that do not contribute as much as us. As a result, it is hard to land a telling blow on the issue, because if you are already one of the biggest contributors in the world, certainly amongst advanced economies in the G7, to knock the government for reducing it, it's fair enough and I agree, but it's very hard to call that a telling blow, because we'll still remain one of the highest committed. But here's the thing, because really what we should be doing is asking, not the Prime Minister, it's not up to him, asking why other countries are not contributing more, truth be told. But it has to be said, with Boris Johnson's policy, if this does go from 0.7% to 0.5%, we'll actually be contributing less than Germany. Now, there's a bit of nonsense going around that Germany only pays 0.4% of its GDP in foreign aid. That is actually untrue. It's just under 0.7%. Some people throw this 0.4% figure about because it's not of GDP, but income. So they're using a different baseline. When you use the same baseline, GDP, we use GDP, why shouldn't we use that for Germany? It actually works out slightly less than the UK. Now, if we go down to 0.5%, that means ours will be less than Germany's. So Boris Johnson is going to enact a policy, is he, where Germany overtakes us. A world-beating strategy there. Then Blackford for his second one. Now, here I thought he was just going to fall flat. He started off by saying he was glad that the Prime Minister agreed with the quote because the quote was his. And I sort of had in the back of my mind, maybe he's a bit disappointed. Maybe he was hoping that Johnson would contradict it and then he could come out with his trump card. But it was you that said it this very year, less than 6 months ago, which it was, by the way, because he was going a bit flat. But then he brought it back. So he linked it to COVID. And he said, look, we can't eliminate the threat of COVID if we do not eradicate it around the world, which is a very good point. It's all right talking about rolling the vaccine out in this country and dealing with COVID. If it still exists around the world and, people come into the country and they got COVID, it spreads again, doesn't it? So he says, does the Prime Minister agree that keeping the 0.7% is not only the right thing to do morally, but also the sensible thing to do in helping to eradicate COVID-19? So as I say, he did rescue it, and I thought when he said the question, that was a good one. It was a bit flat at the start, but it was a good one. Unfortunately, Johnson also had a good response. Again, playing politics, you've got to, I don't agree with dropping the aid budget, but if you're someone who is... See, here's the thing. If you're someone who is also not in favour of cutting the foreign aid budget, then no answer from Boris Johnson's going to convince you. And if you are in favour of it, nothing that Ian Blackford has said is going to convince you either. What these questions are about is the ones who are undecided. And I have to say, if you were undecided, Johnson gave a good account here, because he said, in terms of the COVID-19 specifically, that, well, first of all, it was a bad start, actually. He said, it's fine, because we're gonna let these poor countries buy our vaccine. That's nice of you. But then he did note that the UK is one of the top investors in COVAX, which is a group working to make sure that all countries have the resources they need to deal with COVID-19. I think we could deal with a few of them ourselves. It's not all about vaccines. But there we go. But the commitment wasn't there. He didn't answer Blackford's question, of course. But at the same time, if you just purely from the political theatre point of view, if you were someone who was just watching, looked at Blackford's question, went, "Oh, that's interesting. See what he comes back with." I'm going to have to say that Johnson did give a good account of that one. So I have to finish off. I do apologise, even though Boris Johnson had what I can only describe as a mental breakdown halfway through. It's not finishing strongly because Prime Minister's questions does carry on for longer than that, but I'm going to leave it there. But those are my thoughts. It was truly remarkable. It was thoroughly entertaining. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.